to another Friday morning coaching stream with myself, Matt Hunt. Hope everybody is doing well this week. And for today, we are going to dive into some concepts that relate to the general dynamics of how we're looking at relate to the general topics that we've been studying in the weekly challenges this week. So our challenges have been focused on looking at a lot of dynamic board textures and how we're playing some of those spots. So with that in mind, we're going to take an approach today where we focus on those spots, but particularly we're going to be focusing on defending the big blind and being able to really tell the difference between the different types of dynamic board textures. So what I'm going to do is to very quickly just dive into a little bit of a look at some aggregate reports and just get a sense of our overall strategy across certain board textures. And then from there, we'll run some trainer drills. So we're going to reset the viewer right here. And the priority is just, I'm going to look at a kind of a fairly standard middle position spot. Maybe like we go hijack, big blind, 60 big blinds, pretty default sort of a situation. And I want to focus exclusively on boards that have no pair, and they're going to be 3 to a straight. And I'm also not going to focus quite as much on, well, actually, let's keep the monotone flops in there because they're not quite as dynamic, but they are, important here for some reason or for some to some extent, just to get a sense of the overall principles. Now, there's really a couple of different types of situations that we have to be mindful of here, or a couple of different types of dynamics that are going to go into how we're selecting our ranges, how we're building our strategies in these spots. And the first one is going to be that there are going to be quite a few differences between high card connected boards or high card boards that are a little bit more on the dynamic side versus low card. So if I look here at the high card filter, I'm going to start with the ace highs. And as you can see here, there's a big difference, even in the rainbow category. Huge difference between ace high triple Broadway versus ace high triple wheel, right? That's a big difference right there. And the same is true in the two-tone category. So massive change there. Ace high monotone, still kind of similar when it comes to the connectivity there, because on a monotone board, the connectivity is a bit less important. Now, if we go down through the high cards here, king high, as you can see, king high connected is all going to be fairly consistent. Queen high, fairly consistent. Jack high, oops, that's not the right one to do. Not the right way to do it. Queen high, also fairly consistent. And then Jack high is where we start to get into the territory where a little bit of variation here, depending on whether we in the big blind can have the offsuit hands that make the straight and so on. So there is going to be some variation there. There is going to be some stuff out there that is going to slightly influence our strategy on these boards. And then once we get into 10 high and below, we see big variations. We start to see a lot more boards where in position is going to check a lot more. And so it's going to be some boards that have small bet, some boards that have big bet, and so on. So I want to take a look at how our strategy looks with a response to different check raises. Different bet sizes. So let's say we check the big blind and then in position bet small on one of these connected board textures. We're going to have a pretty reasonable check raise frequency here. And one of the notable things for this spot is that we simply aren't really going to ever have to use the small check raise size very much, right? It is going to be taking place a little bit on monotone boards. We're going to put those to one side just for a second. And as you can see, the raise 50% size is used primarily as the main check raise size that we're using. And there's not really a lot of the small sort of click backy type check raise size. So kind of nice, kind of simple there. And you can see that there's a pretty good check raise frequency on most boards. We're not going to have too many boards where there's a super high check raise frequency. And you can see that there's a little bit of a lower check raise frequency on a lot of these low card connected boards, but this is a bit misleading because these are the boards that we're actually leading out on to begin with at a much higher frequency. So we're sort of putting the money in ourselves there instead of check raising or trying to check raise and waiting for our opponent to do it for us. So largely on these other boards, if we're not donk betting, which we won't be on a lot of boards, then we're going to use the slightly bigger check raise size there. But when we face, let's say, the B75 size, now we have kind of an interesting dynamic, because as you can see, if we face that larger bet on the flop on a 3 to a straight board, there's actually not as much check raising as you would think. There's a pretty low frequency overall. We are using the raise 30, the smaller check raise size, a little bit more often. Still a little bit of both coming in there depending on the exact texture. But essentially, when we're facing this sort of medium sized bet here of about 3/4 pot, you can see pretty clearly that there's less check raising than you might think here. It really isn't a board where we get to just go nuts with check raises. And the reason is because the betting range of the in position player in itself isn't particularly vulnerable against our check raises. We aren't going to be facing a range that has that many sort of medium strength hands in it that are going to be in a tough spot if we raise. We're actually going to be facing quite a polarized bet size, or polarized betting range rather. And that's going to mean that our check raises are a little bit more inclined to put villain in a lot of easy spots. And we don't want that. We want to put them in tough spots. So that is an important consideration that we have to remember here. Now, the exercises that we're going to do in the trainer are going to focus on just kind of a variety of different board textures and bet sizes here. So we're not going to really be able to train one specific type of a spot yet, but we are going to focus mostly on 3 to a straight. And we also in particular want to just try to highlight when we're not donk betting a certain board, when we're not in that position where we get to just lead out with a lot of our range. What type of hands are we going to want to be check raising? What type of check raise frequency are we going to want to have? And if we do face that slightly larger bet, what type of continuing range overall, what type of check calling range is going to make sense for us? So let's dive into some trainer spots here and just get an overall sense of where we're going. We're going to go post flop, 60 big blinds, play as big blind against hijack, single raise pot. Board configuration is going to be two-tone or rainbow. The Broadway cards are going to be, we're going to go at least one Broadway card here. So we're not going to go with any flops that are 0 Broadway cards. 1, 2, or 3 Broadway cards, and 3 to a straight right there. So this is going to be the overall setup. Oops, looks like it, that's weird. I don't know why it changed that, but that's fine. We've got to go back to 3 Broadway cards. We're going to go no pair, two-tone, rainbow. Okay, there we go. And we're also going to just have whatever turn river configuration is going to be necessary here. So we're going to go save and train. We're not going to focus on specific hands just yet, but obviously the focus on the lower portion of our range is something that we have put into the challenges. So hopefully you guys are getting a bit of a sense of how to play some of your bluffs from that. Okay, so we got Queen 6 suited. This is a clear check on Ace 4 deuce. We're not going to have any donk bets here, but villain does check back, and now this is where it gets kind of interesting. We're sort of exploring if we were to bet this turn here. We're kind of getting into the weeds of how do we construct our turn betting ranges when the flop goes check check. So I don't want to go into too much detail there. I think for now, down without a position. Eric, welcome. Thank you for being the first one in chat today. Everybody out there, make sure you test out that like button. Make sure the like button is still working. You got to make sure that YouTube keep YouTube on their toes. Make sure that like button is still functioning. We're not going to bet this hand just because we're probably going to just mostly have equity based bluffs on the turn here, and we're just going to check fold the queen. So we don't want to worry too much about the turn there. We're mostly focused on the flop. So pocket eights, king queen 10 flop. This is Amit, welcome. Thank you for being here. This is not a great spot. This is one of these situations where we will expect to face a range bet. I think eights with a spade may continue at some rate against B25. I think without a spade, I think we'd probably just fold it. Yeah, it's pure fold here. Yeah, low frequency continue with a spade, but otherwise just folding seems fine. Okay, deuce 4, ace jack 10. This is going to be another pretty trivial fold, so we're going to go with that. You know what? No, that's fine. I was going to say let's like just try to avoid situations where we're going to get given trivial folds, but we can just skip through them. It's fine. Okay, 10, 9, 6, and we have queen 7. This is a good one to look at. So we have the gut shot. We don't have a backdoor. We do have an overcard. Curious to see if you guys have any opinions here. I'm not 100% confident myself in what this one will be, but I think this one's going to be a fold. I think that just a naked gut shot with no backdoor here, probably not going to be a good continue. Let's hit fold. Yeah, it is pure fold. Okay. And this is something you got to be real cautious of, right? Just having that gut shot there. Against a small bet, we would not fold here. Against a big bet, much more different. We are folding. Amit says fold. Yeah, I think that fold is going to be very, very reasonable there. Nancy says, I thought we could have check raise against smaller size, though maybe. Possibly. Let's take a look. Let's actually just break down the sim a little bit here. So against big size, you know, a lot of our gut shots are just going to fold, I would expect. If we look at straight draw, we're going to have a pretty decent chunk of gut shots that just fold, like a lot of the king 7, queen 7. Even if they have a backdoor, looks like they're going to fold quite a few of those. The 8 is a little bit better to have here. The 8 being a slightly better straight draw, obviously, to have, because if we have a 7 and the turn is an 8, we lose to queen jack. If we have an 8 and the turn is a 7, losing to jack 8 is much less of a concern. That's the mechanic that's kind of going on there. Against the small bet, let's see if we're going to check raise this combo. I would say probably pretty low frequency, if at all. Queen 7, yeah, okay. So queen 7, no backdoor is not a great check raise. It's a continue, but it's, as you can see, we're heavily favoring having a backdoor here, right? We don't love the idea of a check raise with a 7 that doesn't have the backdoor. And if we were to just unhighlight this, and if I look at, you know, choosing the suits here, if I focus on the straight draw region, and then I look at straight draws with, let's say, 2 spades, you know, the raise frequency there, straight draw with 2 spades is 47% raise frequency. Straight draw with 2 hearts is going to be, as you can see, only 15% raise frequency, right? So in that particular sense, the suit's going to matter a lot. We're not going to check raise a straight draw very often when we don't have a backdoor. 2 diamonds is probably going to, 2 diamonds is going to be, yeah, 46%, and 2 clubs is going to be 45%. So when we have straight draw plus backdoor, we're check raising quite a bit, but straight draw no backdoor, certainly a lot less likely. So that's a good mechanic right there. Cool, so we did correctly fold that one. This one's going to be a trivial fold. We have 4-5 on jack 9-8, so that one's nice and easy. Nothing too much to worry about there. This one's also going to be a trivial fold. I would love to be able to, you know, have a bit more flexibility to choose the hands that are a bit closer, but not a big deal. Ace 10 on ace 4 deuce. This is interesting. Now, one sec. Sorry, got to keep me hydrated here. The nature of a hand like ace 10 here, when it goes check, check on the flop, is we're going to be pretty close to the top of our range, where we have a pretty strong hand here. But the tricky part of this is that villain's check back range is going to be very showdown heavy, and we're likely going to take a very polar turn strategy as a result, to the point where it may be so polar here with the 9.2 size that we might not bet ace 10. I'm gonna go with the polar size. It's gonna be close though, I think. Let's see. Please wait. Normally when it goes to please wait, it's normally okay. Normally if it's like a huge blunder, it can identify it pretty quickly. Okay, yeah. So very polar strategy like you see, and ace 10 is, oh, okay. It's actually, yeah, it's very low frequency bet, but it is in there. We do prefer to bet, a lot of 3x with a flush draw, a good chunk of flush draws, some straight draws, a lot of equity driven stuff, and then pretty much ace jack plus is the main portion of the value range, but ace 10 is kind of in there, so not really a disaster by any means to bet it, just a little bit on the thin side. On this particular river, I think we're going to check. We probably don't have too much reason to block bet. Yeah, this particular combo is just pure check there, so it seems fine. Cool, okay, ace king 10. We're just going to check here for sure. We face a small bet. This is a good example of a situation here where when we face a small bet, I think clearly an ace is never going to be able to fold here. It may come down to being perhaps a low frequency check raise, but I would imagine ace jack, ace queen are the hands, the top pairs that are going to check raise here. Probably not ace 9. By the way, let me know if my audio is okay for you guys. I know people have said in a couple of previous sessions that my audio is a bit low, so I want to strike a balance between not capturing too much background noise versus making sure that you guys can hear me clearly. So if my mic is a bit quiet, then I can up the volume for you guys. Just let me know. We do check call, which was fine, and turn goes check check. Ooh, this is awkward. Yeah, we never really like these spots that much. Audio's okay. Thank you, Emmett. That's great. We never love these spots. There's a lot of hands we lose to. I think most of our ace X just checks and hopes for a check check here. Audio fine. Okay, great. Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, so we do go check check here with the majority of our ace X, and I think that one worked out okay. Ooh, okay, this is a fun one. Jack 10 7. We have 8 6, and we face small. Oof. Yeah, this really sucks. Like, I hate these spots because you do have that gut shot. You don't have a heart in your hand. It's really tough to fold a gut shot to this size, so I think we call, but it wouldn't shock me if we actually do fold here. Yeah, 3% mistake. Okay, we probably do fold. Yeah, okay, so I like the previous spot kind of had me all turned around. Like my instinct here would have been to fold initially, and then I saw the previous one and I was like, okay, we don't fold straight draws to a small bet. But yeah, we do fold occasional straight draws to small bets here. 8-6 offsuit there without the heart is going to be a pure fold. So yeah, we don't want to be too loose there. Ooh, this is an interesting one. King 8. Again, facing small bet. Now this is different in that first of all, we have an overcard. We have the gut shot to the higher end of the straight, although obviously if the 10 did come, we would lose to ace king at some frequency, but that's less of a concern right now. So we do have a hand that has some ability to continue here, some sort of flexibility to navigate in a way that that hopefully will allow us to not have to fold. I just question whether, I think maybe raising probably isn't great with this combo because I think again we would probably rather have a backdoor flush draw. So I think we're going to call. Oh wow, it's actually surprisingly close. It's closer than I thought. A lot of our offsuit King X with a low card, like with a kicker that doesn't really play, those offsuit King X hands are actually surprisingly close. They're kind of mixing. Everything King 4 through King 8 is mixing here. A lot of the suited King X that has a backdoor you can see is high frequency check raise. So we're kind of accurate there saying that we would like to have a suited king with a backdoor in order to check raise. That was not an inaccurate thing to be thinking about. But yeah, definitely kind of an unusual spot for King 8 to be in. Very close. Not going to be a mandatory continue by any means, but it is fine to go with it. So turn is a 3. We're going to check. It goes check, check. So now, out of position on river here, I would expect it's very, very difficult to not bluff because we don't really have a lot of showdown value at all. Our hand is pretty close to bottom of our range. We do block any kind of slow plays. We block some bluff catchers too. We block stuff like King Jack, which is a bluff catcher here, King 9. I think we probably bluff, and I think we go big just because we do still have some strong hands that want to go big here. So I'm going to hit the 13. Colombian Cocaine says overbet. Yeah, we went with the overbet. In fact, it's actually a low frequency overbet. It prefers the 75% size, but it is a good bluff candidate. Pretty reasonable to go with this hand, and we get shoved on and we just fold. If we look at our sizing here on river and how we're actually structuring it, we have multiple different bet sizes, but the way that I like to look at these types of river spots where we have many different sizes is if you go to ignore weight right here and you look at the range map, there's actually some fairly clear trends that you can identify, right? You've got a distinct portion here at the top of the range. If we focus maybe on this area, right? This distinct portion here at the top is pretty much ace queen plus. So top pair, 2 pair, set, straight. And we've got one kind of distinct strategy for this range. We've got a lot of the big bets. Now, it's actually almost, you know what? It's almost like you can split that into 2 sections, right? Because if I go to the very farthest left section, we go like here-ish maybe, or maybe like here, honestly. This is like the very top end stuff that's kind of mixing a lot of different options. Like the very strongest hands in our range are just pretty inclined to go with various different options at different frequencies here. And this is going to be quite common in some situations. But then we've got that segment that I kind of just identified, which we've got everything like right here, which is basically just value. Oops, that's not right. Value for the overbet size, right? We've got like the overbet value region that you can just kind of hone in on the range map. And it's very clearly ace queen. And then Jack 5, Jack 3, 9, 3. So some of the 2 pairs that unblock a queen. This is the stuff that really wants to go with the big size at the highest frequency. So we've got that region as well. Then we have this area right here, which is a huge area of the orange. And that right there is the stuff that's going to want to bet the 75%. And you can see that that is the medium strength queens, right? That's the top pair that's kind of strong but not nutted by any means. Then below that, we have the next category down. So we have like this area, which is the stuff that wants to use the 30% size, which is Jack 10, King Jack, Ace Jack, a strong Jack. That's the value bet region for that size. And then if we go even further down, you've got the next size, which is the block bet size. You've got everything that's kind of here, the one big blind size, which is like this area. It's a weak Jack or pocket tens. This size is used almost exclusively by this region, as well as a few of those low frequency bluffs. So you can really see the different segments of the range and how the different sizes are selected. The checking range is heavily built around this area. This type of hand is almost always checking, and this is a 9, or pocket 8s, pocket 7s, pocket 6s, King 5 suited that just river to 5, right? A lot of these 3rd, 4th pair type hands, these are pretty much becoming part of the checking range. Those are the foundation of the checking range. And then everything at the bottom is just mixing bluffs, right? There's some preference for bluffing for certain sizes compared to others with different specific sorts of hands. Some hands are slightly better or slightly worse than others for bluffing. You can see like a 3 doesn't really want to bluff here. And you can see King 7 and King 6 because they're blocking hands like pocket 7s and pocket 6s. They don't love bluffing quite as much. But there's definitely, pretty strong trend here of we just kind of mix different sizes with the hands that can bluff. And one way or another, we're going to do pretty well here by bluffing at a high frequency with all these hands. There's not really a lot of giving up that needs to happen. So there's kind of an interesting dynamic here when you see the range map and you see the different regions of hands that exist. If we look at the hands purely in terms of equity, nothing really changes here. It does change some of the frequencies and stuff, obviously, but for the most part, looking at the range map in terms of EV is going to serve pretty well. So interesting spot and an interesting breakdown on the river there as well. Ooh, now, okay, so we defend 7-9 off and we flop bottom 2. Bottom 2, we face 1.5. So the fact that we faced a small bet here certainly, I think, makes us a lot more inclined to want to raise. Bottom 2 is the type of hand that, because we unblock top pair, it's usually going to be a very good raise. Yeah, it's high frequency raise. You can see right there, 83% raise. So not really too much reason to not raise there. I think in practice, it's going to function very, very well there, especially considering we have a spade in our hand, which is even better for us. Ooh, okay, we flopped the straight. All right, we flopped the nuts. So, come on, George, big bet. He bet small. Okay. Well, I think that there are a couple of things here. I think the tendency for a lot of players is to sort of go heavily in one direction or the other here, which is that they either just always check raise everything strong, or they get very trappy and they get a little bit too inclined to just want to stop your opponent from folding, keep them in the pot, something like that. And I think there's incentives in both directions. I don't think it's a mandatory call or a mandatory raise. I think that if we did have a backdoor flush draw, we would be a little bit more inclined to potentially slow play, considering that there's a little bit more or there's a little bit less desire to sort of protect against certain bad runouts. But I would say this hand probably just raises. I think we're going to raise to 6.1 here. Yeah, I mean, okay, so this particular combo is pure raise. If we look at the Jack-9 combos as a whole and what they do, we will see, let's just focus on the straight category. The Jack-9 of, yeah, okay, so the Jack-9 of, oh, that's interesting. So Jack-9 of spades, which is the one without any interaction with the backdoor flush draw, is the Jack-9 that is the most likely to just call. So in fact, it looks like we prefer raising if we do have the backdoor flush draw with Jack-9 suited, and we prefer a little bit more calling, a little bit more of a mix if we don't have the backdoor flush draw. That's interesting. And then with the offsuit hands, with the offsuit Jack-9, we just raise if we have, looks like we raise if we have a club in our hand or if we don't have a spade in our hand. And then we're doing a little bit of calling if we do happen to have a spade in our hand. So that's very interesting. Having hands that interact with the backdoor flush draws, even if we don't actually have the backdoor flush draw, does make a difference there. That's an interesting one. Anyway, pocket sevens, Queen Jack 10. I think we're just going to fold this one, especially versus that size. It's pretty trivial. Not really going to do too much differently there. Ooh, this is an interesting one. 8-7. Oh, okay. Just as I was getting ready to think about what are we going to do against a bet here, George finds a check back. So now we have a turn strategy to consider here. And the thing about this particular spot compared to the flop scenario, or compared to some of the other turn scenarios rather, when we looked at the ace high board before where it went check check, the turn scenario here is that we're not really up against as much of a showdown heavy kind of a range here, right? The range of hands that George is checking back on the flop on this board texture is definitely going to contain some pretty weak stuff. It's going to contain some under pairs, some ace highs, some Broadway cards like king, queen type stuff that have some equity but not a ton of equity. It's going to contain a few, draw hands, like maybe some king 8 type stuff. Ugh. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. It's still early over here. Well, that's kind of a cop-out. It's 10:33. It's not that early. So I think our strategy on turn can be a little bit less polar. I would guess that we probably have... This is probably a situation where we would have, like... I would think we probably have 2 sizes. I would think we probably have a small size that allows us to sort of thin value bet and put our opponent's ace-high type stuff in a tough spot. And then a big size that allows us to polarize with some of our really strong hands and put some of those 7x type hands in a tough spot. And this particular hand, I think, is maybe a bit more inclined to just go in the small size. Let's see. Do we like the small bet here? Usually when the software tanks, it means we did okay. Not often we get slow rolled. Oh, okay, wow. It's actually super low frequency small bet. Looks like the small bet isn't really part of our strategy here. That's really interesting. We basically just have the polar size. So that kind of implies to me that the check back range on the flop is not as heavy on ace high or as heavy on lack of showdown value type hands as you would think. It implies to me that in fact what's going on is the showdown value is pretty strong in that check back range, and as a result we have an incentive to go with a more polar size on the turn here. So after we do bet small on turn, king of diamonds river, I think we can't really do anything except check, and then we face pot. This is not really a great bluff catcher now, so we're going to fold. Yeah, we do fold. Villain obviously gets to do a lot of betting here with their specific hand because they just rivered a straight with a diamond blocker, so not really too much to say there. Okay, so we actually do have the low end of the straight here, straight to the 4, which is kind of an interesting one. And it goes check, check again. So just as I was getting ready to try to figure out what we do when George bets this flop, we don't face the bet. So not really too much complexity to really consider there on the flop here, but we do again have to find a strategy for this turn. And I would suspect once again here that flop check back range is going to contain enough showdown value that, especially when the turn pairs the 6 here, we probably want to go with a bit more of a polar strat. And I would expect this hand might be a little bit too weak to go with a polar strat here, just because we're blocking the underpairs, we're blocking 5s and 3s, which is not ideal. So I think we're just going to check this one, or I think I'm going to just check this one. Oh, wow, okay. So, interesting. Definitely a more diverse strategy than I was expecting here. We have quite a bit of some sort of medium sizes on the turn. You can kind of see the same dynamic here. When you ignore the weight, you can really see it in the range graphic. You've got this portion on the right-hand side, or sorry, left-hand side right here, which is kind of the value part of the range here, which is sort of driven by like a lot of 6x. You've got some straights in there too, some top pair type stuff. Certainly a pretty distinct value region right there. And then you've got like the kind of region just below that, which is the stuff that has sort of a varying incentive to bet here, but all of it is 10x, some 7x, this type of stuff. That making a medium sort of sized value bet here would make sense with that. And then we start to get into the territory of bluffs, or hands that are worse than the value region, let's say. Hands that are not part of the value region. There's definitely a distinct portion of hands at the bottom of the range that are just never bluffing here, so we can kind of remove that. But if we look at the stuff that is bluffing at some rate, you can see where some of the trends are. You can see that 9x, 8x. We like bluffing with those, especially, we've got these ones here that have a low card as well. It's kind of good. We actually do, I guess we're bluffing a little bit with deuces here. Betting with deuces, it's kind of a bluff, but not particularly. It's sort of a merge kind of a thing there. But actually it looks like 5-4, 5-3 are pretty decent bluffs here. A little bit worse than some of the other combos. We particularly, as you can see, we don't really like having a 5 or a 4 in our hand to bluff with, again, because we're blocking those pocket 5s and pocket 4s. But looks like 5-3 seems decent here, and we are going to be able to bluff it at a pretty high rate. So a little bit more bluffing than I would have expected there on the turn. Now it does go check on the turn, and we get a river 9. So I would think here that we're probably not dealing with a range that contains a lot of straights. It is a somewhat capped range from George here. Not super capped, not as capped as a real human would probably be, but it is somewhat capped. And we obviously still have a pretty decent chunk of straights. So I would suspect that there's some overbetting going on here. I would also imagine that we probably have some of the bet 4.6. We might even have all three here. I do think this hand is a decent bluff, but we're probably blocking some of the folds. So I think maybe we just bluff with the small size. Let's see. Oh, okay, looks like we don't use the small size here oh, wait, no. Okay, this is our strategy. We do use the small size quite a bit. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. We have 30, 75, and 150. Yeah, okay, so this is again another like pretty clean sort of a strategy here, where you've got different distinct regions of the range here, right? You've got the very, very top, which is full houses, which are almost exclusively betting small, right? So that's the sort of very top end of the range right there. Then you've got this part here, which is a lot of the value that is kind of mixing. Like you've got that right there, which is just 8x. Like straights are doing a lot of mixing right there, just different types of sizes being used. Then you've got stuff that heavily favors overbetting. So this region right here is the stuff that's basically pure overbet, which is a 6. A 6 is a very good overbet card here, or a 6 is a very good overbet hand, rather. I think a lot of people are going to miss it. A lot of people are going to not think that a 6 is that strong here when the river is a 9, so definitely very interesting to see that. We then have a bit more of a mixed region where you've got certain hands that are kind of close between, let's say, more than one different option, but they're favoring the small size. So you've got like 10x, like kind of weird that 10x here is like close between small bet and overbet. Definitely an interesting one there. And then we've also got another distinct region here of the stuff that is very clearly favoring the medium-sized bet, which is going to be like this, basically just like weaker 10x. Pretty straightforward. We've got stuff below that that's kind of mixing. Like this is a really interesting region here, because if you go like this, you've got, it's like you can see the progression here, right? You can see where the stronger parts of this range, like the strong 10x, it's like preferring to bet 75. Your hand gets slightly weaker. Now we have a 9, like we're still able to bet 75. We have a 9 still. We have a slightly weaker 9, now bet 75 and bet 30 become a bit closer. The weaker 9s are starting to favor B30 a little bit more. As we get weaker and weaker, we go further towards that direction. Then, we get to like some other hands here that are like a 7. It's basically only using B30. We don't use the B75 really at all with a 7. We go all the way through the region of hands that has a 7 until we get down here. We get to pocket 5s, which can actually use the B30 size. And then we get to 4s, which just doesn't even really have the ability to use B30. It basically just has to check. And same with 3s and deuces. So there's a really linear progression there that you can see and that you can observe from looking at the range map. And it sort of shows you how some of these spots work. You've got very distinct regions of hands that prefer different actions, and those ranges go together to make up a coherent strategy. And then you've got, of course, if we look at the bottom portions of the range here, you've got the hands that have some degree of showdown value, like the king highs and stuff, are going to just mostly check. And then you've got, let's say, this region, which is basically the bluffs that are mixing in here. A lot of hands containing a deuce, a lot of hands containing 2 low cards here. So yeah, kind of an interesting perspective on this one. Definitely a spot that is pretty tricky to arrive at the best strategy, but does make sense once you actually break it all down. Okay, this one's going to probably just be a trivial check fold. Yeah, let's focus a little bit more on these flop spots and just get through a few more today. We bluff catch the lower pockets in a bit of strong 7x. Yeah, I would think so. If I go back to the session report here and I find that hand, let's go right here. If we look at what we're bluff catching, after we check the river here, yeah, it's probably going to depend on the size for sure. We've got, if we check and we face, you know, the sizes that we mostly face here, it's B75 and B100. So if we look at, let's say, 75, against 75, which is a pretty common size here, we're bluff catching, you know, basically the, if we actually just go like this, we can see what the bluff catching region is. Yeah, I've been pretty much like a 10, a 9, a 7, a 6 obviously is actually going to have some ability to check raise here. We're even bluff catching 5s, 4s, and 3s sometimes. But against 75, yeah, we have to bluff catch pretty wide. And then against 100, if we do the same thing and we just kind of establish, again, where that bluff catching region is, you've got down here, and let's move it across to here. Yeah, check raise with a 6 is kind of crazy. It's kind of aggro right there. And you can see here against the 100, a 6 is not really check raising very much. We do have, you know, we do have some check raise in there with 10-8. Yeah, we basically just can't really easily fold a 7 here. Like, we're still calling 4s against like even a full pot bet here. So yeah, we do have to be, you know, pretty content to call. We do have to just recognize that villain is fairly capped here, but it's also important to note what kind of bluffs villain is going to have, or is supposed to have here. Like, they're supposed to get to this spot with a range of hands that can, you know, can apply some pretty decent bluffing frequencies here. The hands they're supposed to bluff with are going to be king, queen, king, jack, queen, jack, king 5, king 4, some ace high, and then 5-4 suited. And a lot of opponents are not really going to have 5-4 here because they would have bet it on the earlier streets. They're going to find some bets somewhere with some of these hands. So it's just kind of really important to note what the bluffs are supposed to be and are they actually going to exist. And, you know, to some extent, it's not always going to be the case that we can find these. So that's an interesting one. If we ignore the weight here, these are all very low frequency events. Like, this is not a line that happens very often or a line that we get into very frequently. So definitely a tricky one to kind of break down, but always very useful to ignore the weight and just kind of look at what the strategy is in a big picture sense. So interesting right there. Let's go through a couple more. Okay, queen, jack 9 again, and we have ace deuce. We're going to check fold this one. Pretty trivial right there. Not really any reason to do anything else. This is another trivial check fold. We're going to be fine with that one. Ooh, ace 10, no heart on jack 8, 7, 2 hearts, and we face big bet. This is tricky. These types of boards, you have to be mindful of what straight draw you have, right? Because like we saw earlier with having a 7 on the 10-9-6 board, if we have a 10 here and we complete the straight on a 9, we have to be mindful that all of the queen 10 is in villain's range, obviously. If we had ace 9 and we turn a 10, in that spot, it may not be the case that villain would always have all the queen nine in their range. They probably don't have queen nine offsuit in this line, in this spot pre-flop in the hijack. So might be better on this board to have a 9 than to have a 10. But we do still have an overcard. I think we probably call here. It may be this. This could be a blunder. I don't know. Oh, mistake. Okay, probably fold then. Yeah. Okay. So a little bit too loose. Let's see where we're going with our response here. With the straight draws specifically, straight draw 32%. Okay, so we do continue. Yeah, like, okay, so king 10 with the king of hearts, we definitely continue. Ace 10 with a heart, we definitely continue. So we're not that far off here as far as the the combos that we are potentially continuing with. But you can see that we're doing a little bit better continuing when we have some kind of a heart. Now, if we compare, let's say, ace 10 with the ace of hearts here to ace 9 with the ace of hearts, you can see ace 9 with the ace of hearts is very marginally better EV. So, for example, ace of hearts 10 of diamonds is 1.14 big blinds in EV. Ace of hearts 9 of diamonds is 1.17 big blinds in terms of EV. So that's a great illustration there, or representation of the type of dynamic that I was mentioning earlier when it comes to just that idea that we don't always, there is a distinction there between the different types of straight draws that we can have, or different types of hands that might function well in certain spots compared to others. So that's an interesting one. All right, we're gonna do one more. Okay, that doesn't count. That's too easy. King 4 on Jack 9-8. We're just gonna fold that one. Too easy. Ooh, okay. Oh, that's also too easy. 8-4 on Jack, Ace Jack 10. Okay. This is still pretty easy. We'll just fold there. We want like a non-easy one. Come on. Come on, George. Stop giving us all these easy spots. Okay, this is a non-easy one. All right. So we do face big bet on ace queen 10, and ace 5 with a backdoor is never going to fold here. I think it is noteworthy that when we don't have a backdoor, this is probably a lot closer than you would expect. And we'll look at that in just a second. We're going to check this turn because we're never going to donk here. How do you feel about two backdoor flush draw Broadway cards on ace high flops? Yeah, I mean, those are tricky spots. I think generally those hands are not going to fold to small bets. If you do face bigger bets, it gets a lot more problematic. But those two Broadway backdoors are going to quite often be pretty good check raises. They're going to be pretty good spots to put in a raise. But you also have to consider the portion of the range that you're targeting for folds, right? If you have king queen high and you have the nut king high, trying to fold out a pair with a check raise is probably not going to happen. So you may not like check raising that hand if you're just going to fold out a lot of worse hands. I'm going to check this river. I don't think we're going to have too much thin value here. So yeah, we're just going to check an ace. That seems. Oh wait, actually we have a lot of block betting here. That's kind of interesting. We have tons of blocking, almost no checking. Wow, huh? What a weird river spot. Let's just go back to the flop though, because I did want to just take a look at, are we ever folding an ace? And I don't think we are, but I think you'd probably be surprised how close some of the ace X hands are here. Yeah, so something like ace deuce. Yeah, good example here. Ace deuce, no backdoor, is making only 0.37 of a big blind here. So it's not nothing by any means. It's a reasonable margin, but considering there's 10 big blinds in the pot once this bet goes in, ace deuce is not that good of a hand. Ace deuce is definitely on that borderline here. And on top of that, if you look at other hands, when you face this big bet, we are actually folding quite a chunk of second pair and third pair. And if you look at it, the 10x that doesn't have a flush draw or a straight draw, basically just pure fold. Queen X that doesn't have a flush draw or a straight draw, basically just pure fold. Certainly very, very tricky to continue there with these hands. So you got to be really careful about that on these boards. You don't want to be just putting in a bunch of money with those bluff catchers that can't really improve very easily here. Even a hand like King 9 with the King of Diamonds is not by any means a mandatory continue here against the large size, against the sort of medium size of 3/4. So you just have to be really cautious about your defending ranges against these larger bets on boards like this, because there's just so much equity in the pre-flop raises range. There's so many hands that are very strong that any kind of speculative hand here is just not going to fare particularly well. And even an ace deuce suited with a top pair hand, it can still be just basically immediately a bluff catcher here, or it can be a hand that's going to have a lot of trouble navigating across 3 streets here against that very uncapped range. So important to consider that, and that's kind of part of why I put some of these challenges into the weekly pathway for you guys, or the weekly challenges setup. So with that said, I think that's going to be a good spot to wrap it up for today. We are going to continue this section of weekly challenges for next week, and then we're going to come into our recap week for the final week of this 5-week cycle. So I hope you guys will join us for that. We're also going to be continuing to roll out new improvements to the site and to the functionalities as we go forward. So there should be plenty of stuff on the horizon that you guys are going to enjoy. I appreciate you guys for being here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nazi, Hostito, everybody in there. Appreciate you guys for being here. Wang Chung, thanks for being so active in the chat. Always love it when people are in the chat. I will be back again next week, as always, at the same time. And of course, I'll be available for you guys in the Discord if you have any questions, or if you want to explore some of the spots from this week's challenges and talk about some of the details there of how we're going to navigate some of these spots. So thanks, everybody. I will see you all very soon.